Good day, good afternoon, good evening. This is Reverend Will McGarvey, Executive Director of the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County. We're so glad to be able to partner with the Interfaith Peace Project and Father Tom Bonacci on presenting this series, Coping with Nationalism, Searching for the Soul of a Nation, Religion, History, and Politics. Tonight is part one, where we're learning more about how nationalisms get used and even varying definitions of that, and really starting to understand that more. As people of faith and good conscience, we recognize that we are on the unceded lands of Native Americans and First Nations throughout our region, whether that's Ohlone, whether that's Bay Miwok, Patwin, Sisseton, and others in this area, and that we are also a part of a nation with a rich history and a history that is fraught with genocide, enslavement, and hierarchies of some over others. And so this conversation will help us understand those relationships even more. We want to thank Father Tom for being here and being a part of our presentation, and thanks again for your inspiration and sharing these programs with us. Welcome, Father Tom.
Blessings, everyone. It's my privilege and blessing to be with you tonight. Tonight, we want to begin our discussion on coping with nationalism. But before we do so, there's several things I would like to say. One, I do not consider myself to be the professional or the scholar on nationalism. My interest in this lies in the fact that I'm deeply touched, if not wounded, by what's happening in the world today. So I'd like to think that I am standing with you, walking with you, as we do our best to see if we can cope with the reality of life as it is. Here's one thing I know. Interpreting negative events negatively requires no work. The temptation is to look out into our world and say, it's all falling apart. I don't understand anything. Nothing's the way it used to be. Maybe it's the end of the world. And the invitation to despair can be felt deep in our hearts. There are many days when I think my response to the world as it is can only be one of tears and brokenness and uncertainty about the future. My work or my participation in the interfaith world has taught me to challenge such feelings, not to deny them, but not to let feelings of despair and being overwhelmed be the last word. In anything medical, psychological, or spiritual, we can only advance profoundly if we see what ails us, what upsets us, what our failures might be, what our upsets might be. I would like to think that this series, dealing with nationalism, the doctrine of discovery, the issues of racism related to nationalism and the doctrine of discovery, and some approaches that might be positive, is a humble contribution to peacemaking. I strongly believe that the more we understand an issue, the more we pay attention to an issue, the greater our ability to cope with it. So it's not a series to sedate the issue. It's not a series to run away from the issue or to say it will automatically be okay, but ever so gently and ever so lovingly to pay attention to the way we feel, to the anguish of the moment. Here are some of the things that I discovered that I would like to share with you in the first place. And during the research, I saw that people make serious and important distinctions between patriotism and nationalism. And generally, what you might read is that patriotism is love of country, love of your nation, and nationalism is cultural, territorial, political, and governmental purity. The nationalist is tempted to think that there was a time when the nation was pure and the nation was infected by other people coming into it, or people in it not being faithful to its original vision. I also discovered that the term nationalism can be used constructively, as the word patriotism can be used destructively. So we have to come to some kind of agreement, a working agreement. By and large, by the word nationalism, I mean something negative. Even though the word out in the world is used in many, many different ways. We can see nationalistic tendencies in the world, but our immediate concern would be nationalistic tendencies in the United States. Also, we might use another term, and that is loyalty to the nation or a national loyalty. So the best way to understand these terms is to see them as fluid, that different people use the same terms differently. Keeping that in mind, we can take our journey through the material for this evening. May I share two experiences with you where national loyalty, nationalism, and patriotism might get mixed up and confused. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, but I am proud to say I may have come of age in New York City. It's where I went to school. It's where I was able to practice as an interfaith minister for the first time. The diversity of the city, to me, was vibrant. When September the 11th, 2001 happened, the attack on the World Trade Center in particular was personal to me. For many years, I ministered in the Wall Street area. I conducted scripture classes in the Jewish and Christian traditions for executives and business people during the lunch hours. When the World Trade Center was attacked and collapsed, I paid deep attention to my feelings. I felt heartbroken, personally attacked, offended. My first recollection was not that maybe the world is ending, but who could do such a thing? And whoever did this, I dare to say, and I'm embarrassed to say it, I felt hatred. Did I feel love of country? Did I grieve for my city? Did I grieve for my nation? The answer is yes. But what was I feeling? Was it nationalism? Was it patriotism? Was it loyalty? You can see how many of us may have had experiences when we considered ourselves to be attacked as a people. But when I say that I had the feeling that our people were attacked, who would be in our people? Some of us, a few of us, or all of us? What's fascinating to me about the way I felt on September the 11th, 2001, is the second experience I would like to share with you. I was a Vietnam protester. I marched in the streets. I helped shut down the governments. I walked out of my university classes. I helped shut down the university. Is that when I hated the nation? Is that when I was not a patriot? When I listened to my language that I spoke in the 60s, in the Great Protests, one could say, there goes somebody who hates America. What do I do with the feelings that I had in the 60s and the feelings that I have in 2001? I find that fascinating. I now have to do some serious reflection. Did I ever hate the nation, or did I hate what the nation did? Vietnam, to me, was an act of insanity. And if it wasn't an act of insanity, it came across to me as pure evil. But I don't think in reflection that it meant I hated the United States or I hated its people. That's why when we use these terms, we have to be very, very careful. We need to make distinctions. So if I can, let me share with you some insights when it comes to coping with nationalism. And I'm going to see nationalism as an extremism. There are 5 elements I would like to share with you. 1, in dealing with people you label nationalist, identify with some of their actions, identify with some of their passion, rather than labeling them. What we don't want to do is dehumanize people who dehumanize people. We don't want to objectify people who objectify people. Otherwise, we become what we oppose. Sometimes when I see somebody doing something I find offensive, I might want to identify, do I do the same thing? Do I speak the same way? Do I have the same attitudes deep in my heart? Yes, I could be embarrassed and upset that that's happening within me, but that's what can make me free. 2, become aware of the historical circumstances, the distant past, and the immediate events that may be the cause of what's happening in the present moment. 3, remember that individual people have individual histories. They have life stories that correspond to their own experiences. 4, humanize those who dehumanize others. And 5, remember, understanding another person does not mean agreement or indifference. I can understand perhaps why somebody does something I find terrible without agreeing with it or being indifferent to it. I like to think that whenever we study something like nationalism, the doctrine of discovery, our actual history, racism, that such a study, such a probe is an act of interfaith love and spiritual practice. I don't pursue this in order to become hateful to another person. I pursue this so that I might be responsive in the world as it is. Having said all that, let's see if there are some traits of nationalism in general that we can probe. I have 8 elements I would like to share with you. by nationalism, I'm beginning to think that not only does the nationalist attempt a purity and perceive a purity in the land, in the government, in the politics, but also they have an innate sense of exceptionalism and a sense of superiority. Think of sometimes in your life when you walked into a situation and you may have said, too bad everybody else isn't like me. Too bad everybody else doesn't have my perspective. The world would be a much better place if everybody agreed with me. Think of the last time you voted. Would it not be a great idea if everybody else voted the way you did? If everybody else voted the way I did? Number one, under the elements of nationalism. Nationalists basically believe that humanity can be divided into distinct groups defined by religion, culture, or ethnic heritage. That's a fascinating thing to believe, that I can take the world and say, this group of people belongs here, and that group of people belongs there. And I can come up with categories that are neat and clean by which I can put people in boxes. I can put them behind walls. I can put them behind doors, or I can put them behind attitudes. Somebody once said to me, well, maybe you should go back where you came from. I said, oh, if I went back to where I came from in my heritage, I would have to go to 5 different places in 3 different countries. Oh, 2. The nationalist, who rarely would call themselves a nationalist, they would call themselves a pure citizen, a faithful citizen, maybe a patriot, one who's faithful, one who's clean. Thinks that the culture should be pure. Imagine a pure culture. Sometimes I hear people use that term in the United States. We need to preserve our way of living, our culture. Well, I lived in every part of the country, including the middle part of the country. What would the culture be? I don't think there's ever been a time in our existence when we were not multicultural, even among ourselves, whoever the ourselves happen to be. See, the quest for purity sounds very lovely. If only things were the way they used to be, back when they were pure. You see, you wonder sometimes if the nationalist is trying to preserve what was, or is trying to make what they thought was a reality in the present time. 3, for the nationalist, multiple identities are a threat to purity, safety, security, and identity. That's why you sometimes hear the mantra, if you can use that term, they're coming after us, they're coming to get us, they're crossing over the border, they're coming over the wall, they're in the back of trucks, they're in the boats, they're coming into our nation to take it away from us. 4, remember that nationalism, if we understand it as a pathology, is not developmental in any creative sense of the term. It doesn't interact with new ways of thinking. It doesn't interact with the world. It tries to preserve itself against the world. We even heard that in religions. How many times have you heard in the quest for spirituality, people say, I try to insulate myself from the world? That's why a wall made out of metal and concrete may be easy to penetrate, but a wall made out of attitude is almost impossible to penetrate unless one pays attention to one's personal history and the reality of one's life. By nature, everything develops. When you have an ideology and a way of thinking that's trying to freeze everything into the way it thinks it was, it's sure and certain death. Number 5. Nationalism falls back into clear remembrance of the past. To put it this way, nationalists remember what never was and long for it. How many times have you heard or even said, things aren't the way they used to be? When I was a kid, I caught myself saying it the other day. When I was a kid, we, and I meant it, that was the golden age. Well, I sit down and I examine myself, and I'm beginning to remember what never was. I hope you can see what's happening here. That the nationalist suffers from many of the same issues that many of us might suffer from. Sometimes when we're ashamed of some things that happened in the past, we idealize it. Number 6. For the nationalist, one race, one pure race symbolizes and realizes the nation. One race becomes the image of the ideal citizen. Oh, there can be other people in the society, but they would be the servants of the one who is the ideal citizen. Number 7. Here's where it begins to get heartbreaking. Nationalism is a form of race making. As such, discrimination is made possible, and discrimination is even preferred. Once I see myself as the pure one, the one that has legitimacy, the one who has rights over other people rather than responsibilities with other people, it becomes very easy to see other people as less than human, less than myself. Finally, from a psychological point of view, we can see that nationalism fulfills and creates psychological and social needs concerning identity, meaning and purpose, security, and well-being. I truly believe that people believe what they believe because of what function it serves within their life. It gives them a sense of identity. When I think back to my Vietnam protest and to my World Trade Center grief, I was becoming aware of who I am. How I would see myself now is to enter into those tragic moments, to humanize those who would be dehumanized, by the criminal and the victim. I see my identity as peacemaking, even in the midst of conflict and division. Meaning and purpose. Sometimes the nationalist finds in nationalistic tendencies meaning and purpose in life, a sense of belonging, a sense of well-being. Again, while I can understand the nationalist tendency, it doesn't mean I agree with it or that I am indifferent. My ability to identify helps me to cope not only with division and conflict in the society, but the division and conflict in my own life. Let's take a deep breath. Let's take all the love that's in our heart and release it for the sake of the world. Each in our own way, through prayer, meditation, or sending out the blessings from our heart. May those who find it necessary to hurt other people in order to be someone, may they be released of that affliction. Let us conclude by nuancing nationalism in the United States with the rise of something called Christian nationalism. Again, it's important for us to remember that most people who are caught up in these movements do not necessarily self-identify with the labels that we place on them. That's why, as difficult as it may be, it's important for anyone who has the ability to do so to enter into dialogue with other people. Yes, it is possible to talk to someone who might be a nationalist or a Christian nationalist, someone you might say you never want to meet and associate with. Now, here's another element I find fascinating before we consider the elements of Christian nationalism. I've been told for the past many years that this is the age of individualism. Everybody's out there looking for themselves. We're all isolated one from another. We're all on our cell phones. Now, to be honest with you, that description has not always made sense to me. Because if you're on your cell phone, there must be somebody else on the other side of the cell phone. Even if you're in your social media world, you're in contact with a greater community. Isn't it interesting that nationalism seems to be rising out of the age that we called rampant individualism? Maybe our categories, maybe our labels, maybe our analysis is not all that accurate. In light of that, what I find fascinating development, this social movement in the midst of a day and age that's supposed to be rampant individualism. Let's see now if we can't take some of the elements of nationalism and see this term Christian nationalism. And this will set the stage for why we might suddenly be studying the doctrine of discovery. Number one, Christian nationalists believe that America is defined by Christianity. Or to put it bluntly, it's a Christian nation. The critical element here is what kind of Christianity? Number two, the government should favor Christianity over other religions. The government should favor certain Christians over other Christians. I guess some Christians think that they're the true Christians. 3, America was and is a Christian nation, willed and established by God. Well, now, there you go. If I believe that what I believe corresponds exactly to what God intended, I'm going to see myself as pretty powerful, pretty influential. It's what I call playing the God card. In authentic spirituality, any authentic spiritual practitioner I ever met may be convinced of their beliefs, but stand before God humbly. Yes, this is what I believe, but it does not exhaust the mind, heart, and soul of God. Imagine having the mindset that our nation, the United States, was willed and established by God. Now, we've all sang those songs, God Bless America, From Sea to Shining Sea, the 4th of July, Thanksgiving. We call it patriotism. Looks like a little bit of nationalism and exclusivism. Matter of fact, some Christians would read the Bible and see the United States willed by God and established by God. Therefore, to influence the government with diverse thinking, to amend the Constitution, to give rights to people who are not even fully fledged human beings in their mindset, is not only offensive to their perception of national purity, they would see it as offensive to God's will. Number 4, Christian nationalists believe our freedom will be lost if we do not honor and adhere to the Christian identity by which America was blessed by God. That is the freedom of the few, the freedom of the true believer. I'll never forget one day, somebody said to me, God is merciful to those who are worthy of mercy. Imagine that. You have to be worthy of mercy. I don't know about you, but not a day goes by when I don't rejoice that God's mercy is lavish, beyond my wildest dream. Number 5, God blesses America, and Christians have a duty and a right to ensure the Christian nature of America. This impacts severely on the definition of freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is not a right all religious people enjoy. It's a right that some religious people enjoy. Those who are the pure believers, those who are the authentic believers, those who are obeying the will of God and submitting to God by being the true and pure American. Number 6, please keep in mind, Christian nationalists do not necessarily self-identify as such. For many, the fusion of government, politics, and Christianity is self-evident. It's self-evident in their experience and their belief. In that sense, Christian nationalism is a political ideology seeking to ensure the religious identity of the nation. And the religious identity of the nation, as Christian of a type, is a soul and its reason for being. Number 7, Here's the heartbreaking component. Violence seems to be permissible, if not encouraged, in order to keep America pure. For my enemies, the enemies of America are the enemies of God. And God gives me the call to slaughter my enemies in the name of God. Think about that for a moment. It's enough to make you weep. Whenever anyone can take their spirituality, their belief, their religion, their love for God, and turn it into a reason to harm another human being, rather than preserve a nation, you blaspheme God. Number 8. Christian nationalists, like nationalists, are tempted to instinctively believe that the rights of other people are secondary to the religious freedom of the Christian. In other words, rights belong to those whom God had chosen. In doing my research, I found 3 quotes. I would like to conclude with these 3 quotes. Maybe it helps to summarize the material. 1. Nationalism teaches you to hate people you never met. You might even be in the same room with them, but you can't meet them. Not because there's a wall made out of metal and stone, but there's a wall made out of attitude. 2. Nationalism is racism with a flag. We can use religion, government, politics, and culture to enhance ourselves at the expense of others. And finally, I love this one. Nationalism is cured by traveling. What happens if you open the door? What happens if you open the window? What happens if you jump over the wall? What happens if the attitude gets challenged? What happens if the heart opens? I'm beginning to think that many people who suffer from the pathological illness called nationalism are in need of being loved, are in need of somebody recognizing their existence as a human being, are in need of somebody treating them the way they could never imagine treating someone else other than those that they consider to be pure. Thank you, my dear friends. Thank you for having the courage to consider these heartrending topics, to look at them personally, so that our world might have more than a fighting chance for peace, love, and respect. be aware of my love for you.
Wow. Thank you, Father Tom. Much to digest and think about, even on a internal heart level.
Yes, indeed.
Reza, what jumped out at you from Father Tom's presentation tonight?
Very in-depth, profound, and many dimensions. It was very joyful. That's the part that I intended to learn and get educated, and that's what it was. A lot of blessing reigns, and very in-depth, very in-depth. A lot of meaningfully within the encapsulation of words. I'm moved. I really thank you, Father Tom.
Thank you. It's good being with you.
I really appreciated that you complexified these issues for us, because so often when we're reading history or even reading these definitions, it's so easy to just look at things in black and white, right and wrong terms. And if we're willing to go deep enough and ask people what their real motivations and how what they believe might be so central to who they are and how that serves them and how they came about that perspective, and even how that position serves them, even if it is a purely political position for them rather than a religious position, that I think we can start to understand the extreme diversity within the human family that we often overlook, looking for the right and wrong, black and white dualisms that make up so much of our culture.
I think that's right. One, if I may, that was one of the real problems I was having in doing the research for this, because I think I went into this with, I was going to black and white this. That nationalism was going to be in a sinister category all by itself, and you have to be sick to be in that category. And the more I looked at it, I said, you know what, I can identify with some of this. I could see it within my own life. And that doesn't mean that nationalism's okay. It means that the person who's caught up in the pathology of nationalism may be somebody like me. A real live human being who needs help, not another person to attack them.
And if we do just attack them, if we've already made it up our own minds that this other person must be deficient somehow because they've taken these positions, then we're joining this majority portion of our culture, which continues to try to simplify things as if there's just two sides to everything rather than 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 sides to every issue. And we're becoming a part of the problem rather than really trying to meet this other person as the person that they are. And yet at the same time, we're called to be discerning, to be able to recognize when there are predators. You know, as a faith leader, one of my jobs, one of the things that I took a vow to do was to protect my flock from predators and predatory thinking. And sometimes we can get riled up so much in that we forget the people involved, that there might be something within their own life where that position is liberated for them. It could be that they're coming out of extreme forms of white supremacy, and this is a way station for them to return to a fuller view of diversity of the human family. But if we confront too quickly, we could actually confirm them in that position rather than allowing them to continue to evolve.
That's right. We have to be careful that we don't role play the enemy they think is out to get them.
Or become that enemy.
Yes, or become that enemy. Right. I'll never forget once I was in my office and a woman came in and she started yelling at me. And she literally started calling me names. And so I was saying, oh, this may be a great opportunity to practice peace in everything I do. Now, my instinctive feeling is to come across the desk and bang you over the head and, you know, and win the war or the battle. But I said to her, oh, please sit down. I don't want to sit down. Then she did. And went on the attack for another 20 minutes. And I thought maybe, I said a little prayer because I thought maybe this would be my last day on earth by the time she gets done with me. And I wasn't saying anything. And I finally looked at her when she took a break from her rage and said, I'm so sorry that you feel this way. I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. And she started to cry. And I became aware she wasn't attacking me. She was able to cope with some of the feelings and realities that were in her life. But you know, those of us who claim to be peacemakers, practitioners of peace, interfaith practitioners, you put your life on the line. You don't know what the reaction of the other is going to be. You practice discernment as best you can. But this is dangerous work. This is not simply two people have to have a discussion, but two hearts have to meet. Two souls have to meet. And I have to ask myself from time to time, am I willing to do that work? Are we willing to put our lives on the line? Wow. I think sometimes we are tempted to think that what we need is a seminar to understand the terminology, when really we need to engage other people in the actuality of their lives.
So in some ways, this feels like we're talking about tribalism writ large. And when we think of our own faith traditions, the Roman Catholic Church or the Presbyterian Church or MTO, Shamaksudi, a school of Islamic Sufism, it's easy to just, we know who's in, we know who's out. And it's often those larger forces that are encouraging us to protect our own or to tell us that we should be afraid that someone's stealing our cookies or whatever message it is that we're receiving in order to try to protect us from this outside group or this outside threat. How do we deal, and I wonder, especially as someone who accepts evolution, how much that served us for the last 5 or 6 million years to be able to evolve into the people that we are. So tribalism worked for us for the majority of the time that humans have been on the planet. And it's so hard to break these impulses because it feels, especially in this culture, we're told that we live in a zero-sum game, even though that we know that that's not true. We're told that we're living in a zero-sum game. So if we don't get what we deserve, someone else is getting it. And we often feel resentment about this other group or these competitors. We're taught to compete with each other. It's a very competition-based culture, and yet, and so these feelings can rise up within us that are very natural. how do we resist that impulse that has served us well over millions of years to be able to recognize when these forms of tribalism are being used to divide us in divide and conquer politics, or to divide us rich versus poor?
I don't know if this answers your question, which I think is an excellent question. But I'll tell you what comes to my mind, heart, and soul. This issue is in our families. This issue is in our churches. This issue is in our worship places. This issue is in our cultural institutions. There's very, very real people. I know families that are split over this. So when we look at this reality called nationalism and the tribalism that might be behind it, we begin to see that what's behind it is as complex as the issue itself. So, for example, the marriage of traditional hate groups with certain forms of Christianity. How does that happen? What reconstruction of the past has to occur for traditional hate groups and certain forms of Christianity to engage one another? So this nationalism, it's a particular type of nationalism, isn't it? It's we have to pay attention to, it's like cancer. You can say, I have cancer, but what kind of cancer? Is it treatable? Where is it? How long have you had it? The diagnosis. And I think when it comes to diagnosing this, what's in our historical past? What's in our culture? What good things did we believe that contributed to the problem? So the complexity is enormous. But as enormous as that complexity is, it's very, very personal. There's very, very few people I meet in my ministry, in my day-to-day association, who are not caught up with this issue, not in their family. It's in their families. And so the personal history of the individual players is as important as the national history, the nation's history in the past. You know,
So
the
complex.
psychology of this is really important.
But
What
it's so
needs are
complex
being met.
because the individuals that we might experience nationalism through might be being used by other folks for political purposes. And we have to remember to treat the person in front of us with the honor and dignity and respect that they deserve, even if we don't agree with the philosophy that they're living and pushing, perhaps even trying to divide our own families.
We see that's where the interfaith community might want to consider, if I may use the word, is prophetic calling. When politicians use this issue for political expediency, that's morally reprehensible. My quest for power, for wealth and authority is not more important than the dignity of the citizens I'm called to serve. And so simply to see what's happening in nationalism as a political opportunity for me to win an election is not patriotic. It's selfishness at best.
And is twisting the truth of our relatedness, citizens and non-citizens alike, and our need for protection. So we're going to go deep in this series, Father Tom. What are you anticipating we're going to, what else are we going to learn in future sessions of this program?
Well, I like to pick up the idea that this land was given to us by God. And so a pure people live in the land purely. Where did that kind of an idea come from? Where did we ever come up with the idea that you can have a piece of land, even the size of the United States from sea to shining sea, that isn't part of the rest of the land on earth? How can you can divide the world up with boundaries. You can even build walls. But you can't separate one part of the earth from the other part of the earth. By nature, it converges. By nature, it's interrelated and interdependent. By its very, very nature. So what is the background by which you can not only divide the earth up in the nations, but to declare that one nation has a superior right over everybody else? Where does that idea come from? And one of the areas where it comes from is the doctrine of discovery. And then my question is, where does the doctrine of discovery come from? And as you know, what the doctrine of discovery is, when I discover something, it's mine. It was given to me by God, without regard to who may have been there before, especially if they don't believe what I believe and don't look the way I look. So this sense of superiority led to genocide, to murder, and literally to the destruction of the earth.
Even murder in the name of God.
Heartbreaking.
Well, we have a lot to learn still. We'll have more sessions of this program, and thank you, Reza, for being here and a part of this journey as we begin it. And thank you, Father Tom, for helping us go deeper. We'll be sharing more of these recordings all together when they all come out. When we've completed all of them, we'll be sharing them on our YouTube channels. And thank you again, Father Tom, for getting us started tonight. And we look forward to our next conversation about the Doctrine of Discovery. And if you haven't heard about that, some denominations have come out against it, like both the United Church of Christ and the Presbyterian Church, I know, because I've been a part of those conversations and have been happy to see my denominations both come out with statements against it and some educational things to help understand a little bit of the context, but there's still so much of that context that I don't think we understand, and that I think you're going to be able to push, point towards when we look at where these ideas come from, because ideas can liberate and ideas can also constrict and kill. So we need to really know more about this to be able to understand where these ideas come from and who they serve. So thanks again for being here tonight, and we will continue this conversation in the future. Blessed be.
Thank you.